Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. Sometimes one sentence reveals the truth about an entire relationship, and sometimes the moment someone shows you who they really are is the moment you decide to believe them. My name is Robert. When my wife made the last dismissive comment after months of taking advantage of my support, I decided enough was enough. I'm a 35-year-old and work as a finance manager for a large corporate firm in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a kind of high-pressure job that regularly requires 60-hour weeks, unexpected late nights when deals need closing, and constant availability for client emergencies. The compensation is good, but I earn every dollar through stress, long hours, and the mental exhaustion of managing complex financial portfolios for demanding clients. I married Julia when I was 30 and she was 27. We'd been dating for about 3 years after meeting each other at a friend's wedding. Back then, she worked as an HR coordinator for a mid-sized tech company. Combined, our income allowed for a comfortable lifestyle. Our relationship in those early years felt like a genuine partnership. Julia was ambitious about her career, social and outgoing with friends, and we shared household responsibilities fairly naturally. Neither of us was particularly domestic. We'd alternate cooking or order takeout, split cleaning tasks, and generally functioned as two working adults managing a shared life together. Everything changed when Julia was laid off from her HR position. Her company had been acquired by a larger corporation, and the new owners eliminated redundant positions across several departments. Julia's entire team was let go with 3 months of severance pay. It was sudden and unexpected, hitting Julia hard both professionally and emotionally. I immediately reassured her that we'd be fine financially. My salary was more than sufficient to cover our household expenses, mortgage, and lifestyle. I encouraged her to take her time finding the right next opportunity rather than jumping into the first available position out of financial panic. I wanted her to feel supported during what was obviously a difficult transition. Julia seemed grateful for this support initially. She'd spend her days updating her resume, networking with former colleagues, and applying to positions that matched her experience and career goals. In the evenings, she'd tell me about interesting opportunities she'd found, interviews she'd scheduled, and connections she was making in her industry. The job search felt purposeful. During those first few weeks, Julia also stepped up household contributions, which I appreciated. She'd handle things around the house and have dinner ready when I got home from work. I never asked her to do these things. She took initiative because she had time during the day and seemed to want to contribute to our household while not working. It felt like a fair division of labor, given our circumstances. I took pride in being able to provide for us during this period. Growing up, I'd watched my father support our family through my mother's career transitions, and I'd learned that real partnership means carrying more weight when your partner needs support. I never made Julia feel guilty about the income loss or pressured her about money. I wanted her to focus on finding the right career move rather than settling due to financial stress. But somewhere around month 3, I started noticing changes in Julia's approach to both job searching and household management. The daily updates about applications and interviews became less frequent. When I'd ask about her job search, she'd give vague responses about not finding positions that matched her qualifications. She stopped mentioning specific companies she was targeting or networking events she planned to attend. The household contributions she offered in those first weeks also began declining. Laundry would pile up for days before getting done. Dishes would sit in the sink overnight rather than being cleaned after meals. The house gradually shifted from tidy to cluttered as Julia seemed less motivated to maintain the space during her time at home. By month 4, I started coming home to find Julia on the couch scrolling through her phone or watching television rather than engaged in any productive activity. When I'd ask about her day, she'd mention lunch with a friend or running errands. But these activities didn't seem to involve job searching or career development. She'd started spending her day like an extended vacation rather than a temporary setback, requiring active effort to resolve. The most concerning change was in meal preparation. During those first weeks, Julia had cooked dinner most evenings, which I'd appreciated after long days at the office. But by month 5, I was regularly coming home, to find nothing prepared. The fridge would be full of groceries I'd purchased on weekend shopping trips, but Julia wouldn't have used them to make anything. I'd end up cooking for myself or ordering takeout while Julia stayed on the couch. I tried to rationalize these changes initially. Maybe Julia was dealing with depression or anxiety about her career situation. Maybe she just needed time. I told myself that being patient and supportive was the right approach, that pushing her would only create conflict and make things worse. But privately, I was becoming increasingly frustrated. I was working long hours. I'd come home exhausted to a messy house and no dinner, while Julia had been home all day, apparently doing very little. The household division of labor that had felt fair when she was actively job searching now felt completely imbalanced. The breaking point came on a Wednesday evening about 11 months into Julia's unemployment. I'd been at the office since 6:30 that morning, working on finalizing a major acquisition deal for one of our biggest clients. The negotiations had been tense, requiring constant revision of financial projections and terms. By the time we finally closed the deal at 7 p.m., I was mentally and physically exhausted. I didn't stop for food on the way home despite being hungry. I was too tired to deal with restaurant or drive-through stops, and some part of me was thinking that Julia would probably have made dinner since I'd mentioned that morning that I'd be working late. After working a 13-hour day, coming home to a prepared meal felt like a reasonable expectation when my spouse had been home all day. I pulled into our driveway around 7:30 and dragged myself to the front door. As I unlocked and entered, I immediately saw that the kitchen was completely untouched. The breakfast dishes my wife left in the sink that morning were still there, joined by a coffee mug and lunch plate Julia had apparently used during the day. The fridge was well stocked for my weekend grocery shopping, but clearly nothing had been prepared for dinner. I walked into the living room and found Julia on the couch in comfortable clothes, watching some reality show on television with her phone in hand. She glanced up when I entered, gave me a brief acknowledgement, and then returned her attention to her phone screen. I stood there for a moment, trying to process my frustration calmly. I asked her directly why she hadn't made anything for dinner, pointing out that she'd been home all day. I kept my tone neutral, genuinely asking rather than accusing, still trying to give her the benefit of the doubt about whatever had occupied her day. Julia's response was dismissive as she said, "I'm not your cook," with an edge to her voice that made it clear she found my question offensive. She didn't apologize for not preparing anything or offer any explanation about being busy with other activities. She just rejected the premise that making dinner after being home all day while I worked was something she should have done. I stood there silently, feeling something shift fundamentally in how I saw our relationship. Her comment wasn't just about dinner. It was a statement about how she viewed her role in our marriage, about whether my long hours supporting us financially created any reciprocal obligation on her part, about whether she valued my contributions or just took them for granted. I didn't argue or respond. I walked back to the kitchen, found a package of instant ramen in the pantry, and prepared it while Julia continued watching television. I ate standing at the counter, too tired to even sit down, while my wife of 5 years scrolled through social media in the next room without any apparent concern about my exhaustion or well-being. That night, lying in bed while Julia slept next to me, I replayed everything about the past 11 months. I also thought about other aspects of our relationship that had deteriorated. Our physical intimacy had dropped to almost nothing over the past few months. We'd gone from regular sexual connection to maybe once every few weeks, and even then, it felt mechanical rather than passionate. Julia seemed uninterested in physical affection, turning away when I tried to initiate or making excuses about being tired. Our communication had become similarly hollow. Conversations felt forced. We weren't connecting emotionally or intellectually anymore. We were just two people living in the same house, with me funding that house while Julia did what exactly? Scrolled through her phone and watched television? For the first time, I allowed myself to think the question I'd been avoiding. Why was I still married to her? What was Julia actually contributing to our relationship or household? What would fundamentally change if I lived alone rather than with a spouse who acted more like an ungrateful roommate? The thought was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because divorce meant admitting failure, facing difficult conversations, and dealing with financial and logistical complications. But liberating because it offered an escape from a situation that was making me increasingly resentful and unhappy. The next morning, instead of confronting Julia about her comment or trying to have another conversation about household contributions, I made a different decision. I called a local cleaning and meal preparation service that one of my colleagues had recommended weeks back. For a reasonable monthly fee, they'd send someone 3 times per week to clean the house and prepare meals that I could heat up when I got home from work. I didn't discuss this with Julia before hiring them. I didn't ask her permission or give her a chance to promise she'd do better. I simply solved the problem by outsourcing the household tasks she decided weren't her responsibility. If she weren't my cook or housekeeper, fine, I'd hire someone who would actually do those jobs. But more importantly, I started noting everything. I wasn't planning to confront her with this information. I was building a record in case I decided divorce was the right path forward. I also started thinking seriously about what divorce would look like practically. Georgia is an equitable distribution state, so assets would be divided fairly, but not necessarily equally. We'd owned the house for 5 years, building some equity. I had more in retirement savings from my higher income. We had some shared debt, but nothing overwhelming. I'd likely lose some assets in a divorce settlement, but I started framing that as the cost of buying my freedom. What price was worth paying to escape a relationship that had become a source of stress and resentment rather than support and partnership? My demeanor toward Julia changed markedly after that night. I didn't yell or create drama, but I stopped engaging with her the way I had before. I became polite but distant, treating her more like a housemate than a spouse. I stopped seeking her company, stopped trying to plan activities together, and stopped attempting to create any connection. My language shifted in ways Julia eventually noticed. I stopped saying we when discussing future plans and started saying I. I was linguistically separating myself from her, no longer assuming we were a unit. I also stopped updating Julia about my work or sharing details about my day. Previously, I'd tell her about interesting projects, difficult clients, and office politics, even when she acted uninterested. She was no longer someone I confided in or sought emotional support from. The housekeeper started coming the following week. She'd arrive mid-morning 3 times per week, spend a few hours cleaning the house and preparing several meals I could reheat throughout the week, and then leave. The service cost quite a bit, but I considered it money well spent for the reduction in stress and resentment. Julia's reaction to the housekeeper's presence was immediate offense. The first evening after the housekeeper had been there, Julia confronted me about hiring someone without discussing it with her. She asked if I was trying to replace her, if I was making some kind of point about her not doing enough around the house. I looked at her without saying anything for several seconds. I wasn't interested in arguing about it or justifying my decision. I'd hired help because I needed it, and her opinion on the matter wasn't particularly relevant to me anymore. That look unsettled Julia in a way that arguments never had. She'd grown accustomed to me being patient, understanding, and willing to talk through problems. But my silence and detachment communicated something that words never could. I was done. I wasn't interested in negotiating, discussing, or working through our issues. I'd mentally checked out of a relationship. Over the following weeks, I continued planning my exit strategy while maintaining this new dynamic. I consulted quietly with a divorce attorney, understanding my rights and likely outcomes. I organized our financial documents and ensured I had copies of everything needed. I opened a separate bank account and started directing my paychecks there, leaving only enough in our joint account to cover shared bills. Julia noticed these changes, but seemed uncertain how to respond. She started making small efforts, but these gestures felt reactionary rather than genuine, driven by sensing my detachment rather than actual change in her attitude. About 6 weeks after the "I'm not your cook" incident, I had Julia served with divorce papers at home. I'd coordinated the timing, so I was at work when she received them, avoiding the immediate emotional confrontation. She called me immediately confused and panicked. She asked what the papers meant, if this was some kind of scare tactic, and if I was seriously planning to divorce her over one comment about cooking. Her voice had an edge of disbelief, as if she'd never considered that I'd actually leave despite months of taking my support for granted. When I got home that evening, Julia was waiting with a speech prepared. She apologized for saying she wasn't my cook, explaining that she'd been stressed and said something she didn't mean. She claimed she loved me, that we could work through our problems, that divorce was an overreaction to a bad moment in our relationship. I listened without much emotion. Her apology felt hollow because it focused on the one comment rather than the pattern of behavior it represented. She was sorry for saying something that had consequences, not sorry for months of taking advantage of my financial support while contributing nothing to our household or relationship. I told her that the "I'm not your cook" comment wasn't really the issue. The issue was that her actions over those months had already shown me her priorities and how she viewed our marriage. She saw me as a provider who owed her financial support without any reciprocal obligation on her part. She'd become comfortable treating our home like a hotel where I paid all the bills while she did whatever she wanted with the time. Julia tried various approaches over the next few days. She'd swing between apologizing and getting defensive, between promising to change and arguing that I was being unreasonable. She'd point out that she'd been dealing with the emotional impact of a lot of things, that I should be more understanding of her struggles. But nothing she said addressed the fundamental issue for months. She'd had the opportunity to contribute to our household in meaningful ways while job searching. Instead, she'd chosen to treat my support as an entitlement while spending her days on the couch. And when I'd asked the most basic question about dinner after a 13-hour workday, she'd responded with dismissive disrespect. The divorce process that followed was messy and contentious. Julia fought me on almost every aspect: asset division, timing, and terms. She hired an aggressive attorney who tried to maximize her settlement, arguing that she'd given up career opportunities to support my career, that she deserved significant spousal support while she rebuilt her professional life. Julia also made the process personally difficult. She'd show up at my office unannounced, trying to force conversations I didn't want to have. She'd send long, emotional text messages at all hours, alternating between begging me to reconsider and accusing me of abandoning her when she needed support. She'd contact my family members, trying to get them to intervene and convince me to drop the divorce. Through all of this, I maintained composure. I didn't respond to emotional manipulation, didn't engage with dramatic gestures, and didn't let her pull me into fights that would make the process even more difficult. I communicated only through my attorney, kept interactions brief and businesslike, and refused to be drawn into the emotional chaos she was trying to create. The divorce took about a year to finalize. The settlement gave Julia roughly 40% of our marital assets, a significant portion that included her share of the house equity, some of my retirement savings, and a modest amount of temporary spousal support while she found work. It cost me financially, but I accepted that as the price of ending a relationship that had become toxic. Throughout the process, Julia never really acknowledged the pattern of behavior that had led to the divorce. She remained focused on the "I'm not your cook" comment, as if that single moment was the problem, rather than recognizing it as the culmination of months of taking me for granted. Today, about 2 years after initiating the divorce, I live alone in a smaller house I leased after we sold our marital home. My financial situation isn't as strong as it was before. Between the divorce settlement and the costs of starting over, I've taken a significant hit. But my stress level and overall happiness have improved dramatically. I come home to a clean house that stays clean because I maintain it. I eat meals the housekeeper prepares or occasionally dine out without resentment. I spend my time and energy on work and hobbies I enjoy rather than managing someone else's expectations while receiving no appreciation for my efforts. I've started dating again, though I'm much more cautious about relationship dynamics and division of labor. I pay attention to whether potential partners view relationships as mutual support or one-sided provision. I notice whether they contribute effort proportional to what they receive, or whether they expect to be taken care of while offering little in return. The experience taught me that being a good provider doesn't make you a doormat, that financial support without appreciation or reciprocity isn't a partnership, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is exit a situation where you're being taken advantage of, regardless of how it looks from the outside. A lot of people didn't understand my decision to divorce Julia. They'd say things like, "You gave up too easily on your marriage." But those people didn't come home every night to someone who'd spent the day on the couch while they worked long hours, who couldn't be bothered to prepare a meal or maintain the home they lived in for free, who dismissed requests for basic consideration with contempt. Real partnership requires both people to contribute according to their circumstances and capabilities. When I was working and Julia wasn't, it was reasonable to expect her to handle more household tasks. That's not about traditional gender roles. It's about practical division of labor in a relationship where one person has significantly more time available. Julia's refusal to see that basic reality revealed a fundamental incompatibility in how we viewed marriage. I wanted a partner who would pull their weight regardless of circumstances. She wanted someone to fund her lifestyle, while she did whatever she pleased with her time. Walking away from that situation wasn't giving up on marriage. It was refusing to accept a relationship that had become one-sided and disrespectful. Sometimes the bravest and healthiest thing you can do is acknowledge that a situation isn't working and make the hard choice to leave, even when others think you should keep trying. Suppose you're in a relationship where you feel like you're carrying all the weight, where your contributions are taken for granted rather than appreciated, and where requests for basic reciprocity are met with contempt. In that case, you're not obligated to keep sacrificing yourself. You deserve a partner who values what you provide and seeks to contribute proportionally, not someone who treats your support as an entitlement while offering nothing in return. The price of freedom is sometimes high, but it's almost always worth paying. Living alone but respected is better than living with someone who treats you like an ATM rather than a partner. And recognizing when a relationship has become transactional rather than reciprocal is the first step toward reclaiming your life and self-respect.